for the second in our two-part series about the power of information in the age of globalization and how it transforms our lives and the relationship between people and power. Once upon a time, the world got its news from just a few sources.
This is London.
But those once all-powerful voices
That's the way it is.
are now competing with an ever-multiplying cacophony.
Live from Moscow.
There are hundreds of news channels around the world. Any citizen with a cell phone or a laptop can be a reporter of sort.
Have a good evening, go out and register to vote.
What we're talking about now is a kind of explosion around data that is transforming the very idea of news.
We stand for a single internet where all of humanity has equal access to knowledge and ideas.
But that makes it impossible for governments or corporations to control their most powerful currency, information. Even in the bastion of free speech, the USA, the conflict continues between a government determined to keep its secrets and whistleblowers even more determined to disclose them. 30 years ago, as the Vietnam War raged, the New York Times published the Pentagon Papers and brought the wrath of the US government down on Daniel Ellsberg, the young military analyst who leaked them.
They took a number of criminal actions against me, including an attempt to incapacitate me totally. Those were their words explicitly, to incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally, which could have meant anywhere from killing me to perhaps just putting me in the hospital for some time.
Soon after, the president was forced to resign after stunning revelations by two Washington Post reporters, aided by a whistleblower known only as Deep Throat.
Nothing's writing on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country.
Today, whistleblowers go global instantly. WikiLeaks is shaking the world, posting shocking videos.
Light them all up.
Come on, fire!
Hundreds of thousands of classified documents about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and a treasure trove of reports and diplomatic cables that embarrassed leaders from Kenya to Argentina. Julian Assange founded WikiLeaks.
Media has a right and an obligation to the public to get out information that the public needs to know.
But many in the US disagree.
If we lived in Great Britain, 007 would be getting. He needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and if that becomes a problem, we need to change the law.
Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism.
I would argue that it's closer to being a high-tech terrorist than the Pentagon Papers.
Have over 2,000 sites now across the world. They're going to have to take down all 2,000 if they want to stop the release of this material.
The American government is investigating whether it can charge Assange with espionage. Meanwhile, Private Bradley Manning, the 22-year-old suspected of being behind the largest leak of state secrets in history, has been in maximum security custody since last July. Today, the free flow of information is overturning autocrats across the Arab world. Who knows where the next domino will fall? Joining me to discuss the challenge of new media to governments and governed to the dictators and the dictated is Carl Bernstein. You are a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who famously helped oust a president. Amy Goodman, best-selling author and the dame of multimedia's Democracy Now! Professor Emily Bell, Director of Digital Journalism here at Columbia University and formerly at the British Guardian newspaper. Clay Shirky, you're a professor, author, and guru of new media. And last but not least, Yevgeny Morozov, cyber skeptic and author of The Net Delusion, The Dark Side of Internet Freedom. Ladies, gents, welcome to Empire. Carl, let me start with you. What's the difference between these WikiLeaks phenomena and those in the 60s and the 70s, from the Watergates, Pentagon Papers, and so on?
Well, first of all, the WikiLeaks involves the dissemination of raw information by an organization determined to simply disseminate that information without commenting on it, basically, without putting it into context. Yes, we have these fabulous new tools and much greater speed that we have to be much more careful about context and sometimes slowing down to get it right. That an intricate part of the political process, particularly that of free nations and becoming free, has been information, going back to the American Revolution, to broadsides, put up on trees. That's how information spread. So all I'm suggesting is that this is somewhat a continuum. And I would choose to look at WikiLeaks in that continuum rather than an isolated phenomenon.
In fact, WikiLeaks wouldn't have had the exposure it had without the New York Times, the Guardian, Der Spiegel, and so on and so forth. So actually, traditional media is still key.
Yeah, I think it played a very significant role in amplifying the WikiLeaks story. I might argue that it hasn't necessarily been that helpful in describing context, because certainly in the latter stages of the story, it became very much about Julian Assange and his personal hygiene and the state of his socks, and much less about the actual material that was in the cables and those stories that were being reported but moved on from, not by the new media actually, but by the old media really very quickly. And I think what we have is a partnership between the old and the new. And I think we have more truth and, if you like, a kind of a clearer and more sort of disseminated version of that than we have before.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I believe in the web. I believe in these instruments. What I'm also concerned about, though, is that we take the best of the standards of old media. And some of that is necessary to vet and shape information in the new formats as well. But it also means that anybody in this room or anywhere else can start and give millions of people access to false information.
Before we get to the content and context, actually, Amy, the actual medium is under attack. Such websites now are considered enemy territory, and the people who run them as terrorists. Is this a freedom of expression, or is this cybersecurity, or is this national security that we're talking about?
I mean, it's very frightening to hear people like the Vice President of the United States talk about WikiLeaks as perhaps a terrorist organization. I mean, WikiLeaks has profoundly changed the way we get information. I am reminded years ago, coming out of reporting on East Timor when it was occupied by Indonesia, and we had gotten some documents under Freedom of Information Act that showed that Kissinger, way back when Indonesia invaded, had warned his colleagues at the State Department when he was Secretary of State not to say anything about the U.S. weapons flow to Indonesia that was being used to kill the people of East Timor. And when my colleague Alan Nairn asked him the question, said, I am holding the documents right here, Kissinger said, it's because of people like you that we cannot conduct diplomacy the way we expect to conduct diplomacy. Okay, let's go forward 20.
Kissinger once.
Let's go back, let's go forward now. This is exactly what is happening in the age of WikiLeaks, is that governments that thrive in darkness, when sunlight is shed on them, they cannot stand up. So you see what happened in Tunisia. It was because of the incredible resilience of the Tunisian people, but also because of documents released by WikiLeaks, and then that spread to Egypt.
Clay, revolutionary then?
Well, you know, if you use the word revolutionary, it's always subject to critiques on both sides.
You know, we are all inspired by Egypt's revolution.
Yeah,
so
no,
now
exactly.
everything is a revolution.
That is a genuine, Tunisia, Egypt, genuine revolutions, but you can always find evolutionary precursors to anything you want to call a revolution in technology. So it's a kind of a meaningless term in a lot of cases. I think it's worth talking in some specificity about what Julian actually did. And the first was to marshal the best technical work on maintaining the secrecy of the sources. So we could go to potential leakers and say, if you leak to me, no one will find out by listening in between. There are some hundreds of people in the world talented enough to do what Julian did, but he was the one who, with his team, sort of made this happen. The second innovation was not just distributed storage against technical attack, but distributed storage against legal attack. There is no one nation state whose laws or the reach of their police force can shut down WikiLeaks. So it is the first transnational organization, and we saw that play out when we tried extra legal attempts to shut them down. The big innovation in WikiLeaks is not the technical innovation around secrecy of leakers, but the distribution of the site of the leaks so that you can't use any set of national rules to shut it down. Right? Anyone leaking any document today, and I think from now on, will choose not to leak it to the national press of the country the secrets are about, because you would much rather go to a source that your own country can't reach, rather than doing it, as happened with the Pentagon Papers, entirely within one nation.
But Yevgeny, I guess international regulations are also possible. I'm sure governments will have an interest in that.
Well, I think in some sense WikiLeaks was lucky because it got itself a nice enemy, the government of the United States, which is constrained in many respects by the rule of law. Had they pulled the same trick on the Kremlin, it would not be about the rule of law that we'd be talking about. We'd be talking about attempts to shut down WikiLeaks by physical force, and poisoning and what else, right? We know that their toolkit is much broader than just international law. So in that sense, I'm not sure how revolutionary that really is. And again, we have seen pressure. I think it was actually very successful. I still don't see WikiLeaks returning to Amazon or to PayPal or to Visa or to MasterCard, right? So in some sense, their work is still constrained by the fact that they cannot easily receive donations online. They cannot host themselves as easily with American servers. So in some sense, I think the nation state did strike back.
One thing that I think Julian has done is he's created enough of an advertisement for the structure of WikiLeaks that he's built the ecosystem in which WikiLeaks is now being competed with. So you look at Daniel Domscheit-Berg and OpenLeaks, the new service that essentially operates as a more white-labeled Dropbox. Or you look at the Palestine Papers, which was up on the screen a moment before. What I think Palestine
That's
Papers...
AlJazeera's Palestine paper.
Right, of course, AlJazeera's Palestine paper. I forgot I was paid per product placement. Al Jazeera and The Guardian's Palestine Papers says you can get transnational distribution of material without having to build a novel transnational organization. And the threat of, to governments that want to keep secrets, to Amy's point, the threat of transnational networks that are built out of existing news organizations is actually considerably harder to constrain, not against poisoning, obviously, if somebody wants to go there, but there's not nearly as much of a single titular head of the Palestine Papers operation as there was of anything WikiLeaks has ever done. So the pattern is already becoming more general.
Amy, is the genie out of the bottle, you think?
Oh, what has happened now is beyond extraordinary and beyond significant, and we see the effects when this information gets out. I mean, we are seeing a rolling revolution